There are moments in the endless march of the Imperium when time seems to halt, when even the warp's chaotic whisper draws its breath in awe. Picture it, a lone figure, armor scorched and sacred heraldry blackened with ash, kneeling amid the ruins of a world that no longer remembers its own name. The banners of the Imperium hang torn and bloodied around him, their aquila sigils staring down like the eyes of judgment itself. Beneath the dull hum of his dying power armor, he can still hear it, the whisper of his oath, the words sworn before his chapter, his brothers, and the Emperor himself. The vow that bound his soul in iron and fire, and now he has broken it. But what does it mean for a space marine, an Astartes, molded in the Emperor's own image, to break an oath forged in his light? Is it betrayal, or is it revelation? Can there exist in the galaxy a moment when obedience becomes a greater heresy than defiance? Beneath the cold stars and the distant pulse of the Astronomicon, one brother dares to find out. His sin is unthinkable, his purpose unsanctioned. Yet in that fracture between faith and ruin lies a truth that even the ecclesiarchy fears to name. So stay with me, through smoke and shadow, through the echoing halls of lost fortresses and the silence of a broken Vox channel. For this is not the story of a traitor. It is the story of a man who once believed that loyalty was the same as love. The battlefield was silent now, but the silence was wrong. It wasn't the calm of victory, nor the blessed peace the ecclesiarchs spoke of in their sermons. It was the silence of things unmade, the hush that falls when the very air is too heavy to carry the weight of what has been done. The ash storm had not ceased for days, though the winds no longer howled with rage. They moved like dying breath, dragging the remnants of fire and bone through the hollowed remains of the city that once had a name. Brother Sergeant Cale Varen stood there, his armor half-locked by cooling ceramite, the crimson of his chapter's markings dulled to the gray of soot. The servos in his greaves whined as he shifted his stance. He was alone among the dead. The ground beneath him was layered with glassed rubble and burned flesh. Bolter shells had melted into the streets. The aquila sigils that once crowned the citadel walls were little more than jagged outlines where holy fire had torn them free. He looked to the east, where the morning light fought to pierce the smog. It bled through in thin veins, pale and tired, glinting off the shattered lenses of his helm. Call reached up, disengaging the mag clasps, and removed it. The air struck him like a punishment, sour, metallic, hot with ozone. Beneath his scarred scalp, a faint echo trembled, as though his very thoughts were trying to flee the confines of his skull. The Vox link was still open, broadcasting static. Somewhere in that storm of sound, he imagined he could still hear their voices. Varen, report. By his light, confirm position. The memory wasn't real. The command had come hours ago, before the orbital strike fell, before the comms had died and the company along with them. Yet his mind replayed it with a cruel precision. He could almost see them, Brother Maron, laughing even as his chain blade tore through heretic armor. Chaplain Ephrion, his Crozius blazing with righteous fury, and the banners of the Second Company bright against the flame. Now they were gone, all of them, burned into a silence that would never answer back. Coyle's throat tightened. He remembered the oath, the one sworn in the Reclusium before deployment, the words every Astartes knew by heart. By the blood of the Gene Father, by the will of the Master of Mankind, I shall not waver. But what did it mean to not waver when there was nothing left to stand upon? He turned, scanning the ruins. The enemy had been obliterated, but not by his hand. That was the bitter irony. The orbital strike had come from above, sanctioned, cold, and unerring. a decision made by voices far removed from the dirt and the blood. A tactical necessity, they would call it. Cleansing, efficient. It did not matter that the Vox logs had warned of civilian presence, of refuges beneath the manufactorum levels. It did not matter that Coil had shouted into the comms, demanding delay, invoking both honor and logic. The fleet had answered not with words, but with light. And now he stood in the aftermath of obedience. A faint movement caught his eye, the twitch of metal, the hiss of hydraulics. Kyle swung his bolter up, safety off. But what emerged from the smoke was no foe. It was a servitor, half crawling, half dragging itself through the rubble. Its torso was burned black, the left mechadendrite sparking in short convulsions. One optic flickered with dim light. Kyle approached slowly, the servitor's Vox grill rasping out fragments of code prayer, a broken litany meant for the machine god. He knelt beside it, one gauntleted hand steadying the creature's frame. The heat from its metal was still sharp against his palm. "Directive?" Kyle asked, though he knew the thing could hardly answer. Its remaining eye swiveled toward him, a faint recognition in its ruin. "Protect the faithful," it croaked, voice distorted beyond repair. Then, after a sputtering pause, error. No faithful detected. Cole exhaled. The servitor spasmed once, then went still. Its internal cogitator gave a final whine and faded. For a moment, he envied it. Machines did not bear memory. They did not hear the voices of those they failed. He rose, slinging his bolter across his back. A low wind stirred the ashes, carrying with it a distant sound, the cracking of metal, the faint murmur of water deep within the sewers beneath the city. Somewhere down there, perhaps, the echoes of life still moved. But what life could survive the wrath of the Imperium's own hand? Cale found himself walking before he even decided to. His boots sank into the debris, each step a dull percussion in the silence. He moved through streets lined with melted statuary, saints and heroes whose faces had become featureless masks of slag. Their once raised arms now pointed nowhere. He stopped at a collapsed shrine, its altar overturned. A half-buried icon of the Emperor stared up at him through layers of soot. Cale bent down and brushed the ash away. The visage beneath was cracked, the golden halo shattered, but the eyes, sculpted in divine judgment, still held their cold gaze. He should have bowed. He should have recited the proper benedictions. Instead, he felt something dark coil within him, not hatred, but grief sharpened into disbelief. "You commanded this," he murmured, the words barely audible. "Or those who claimed to speak for you did." The wind answered with nothing but dust. Cole lingered there longer than he meant to, until the Vox crackled again, faint but present. A coded signal, short, clipped, distorted. He recognized the pattern. Command frequency. There should have been relief in that, but all he felt was unease. He reattached his helm, the sealing hiss echoing like breath drawn too deep, and tuned the receiver. Varen, status unknown, extraction incomplete, surviving assets to regroup at grid. The rest dissolved into static. He glanced toward the horizon. Grid coordinates. That would place the signal near the old manufactorum complex, 3 kilometers east. If any of his brothers still lived, they would be there. The duty was clear: reunite, reform, await new orders. Yet as Cale stood beneath the ruined sky, something in him recoiled from that thought. Orders had brought them here. Orders had burned this world to its bones. And for the first time in his centuries of service, Cole Varen hesitated. He looked down again at the cracked visage of the Emperor, the broken halo, the dust collecting in the hollow of the eyes. "I swore to you," he said, and his voice carried through the empty air like a confession. "I swore to protect what you made." There was no reply, only the slow rhythm of the ash falling, soft as snow. Coil turned his gaze eastward and began to walk. The silence followed him. The Manufactorum district rose ahead like the bones of some colossal beast long since picked clean. Jagged spires of adamantine, half-collapsed gantries, and fractured pipelines clawed at the haze-filled sky. Even from this distance, Kale could smell the acrid tang of promethium and burned oil, a stench that clung to the air like the echo of screams. The ground here was unstable, pitted with craters where the orbital strike had gouged deep scars through ferrocrete and steel. Every step jarred his armor's servos, each impact sending faint vibrations through his reinforced frame. But he kept moving. His internal auspex whispered intermittent readings, faint thermal traces, ghost signals, flickers that might have been life or merely the last embers of the dying machines. He reached the outer gate first, a structure once proud and defiant in its construction, now twisted by heat and violence. The imperial aquila that had once adorned its surface was no longer recognizable, half melted into the surrounding metal like a fading wound. Kale paused and raised his bolter. His helm's lenses scanned the interior. The silence was dense, not empty, but expectant. It reminded him of the seconds before a storm breaks, when every sense strains against what's coming. He stepped inside. The Manufactorum's heart was a cathedral to labor and sacrifice. Vast halls stretched before him, choked with soot and debris. Conveyor lines lay still, their tracks buried beneath ash. Statues of the Omnissiah loomed in the shadows, their cog halos flickering faintly from half-dead lumen strips. Somewhere deeper within, a rhythmic sound pulsed, mechanical, but faintly irregular, as if something alive was trying to mimic the beat of a heart. Coil moved toward it, bolter raised, every step deliberate. His armor's power pack gave off a low thrum, echoing in the cavernous space. As he passed beneath a collapsed archway, his autosenses registered movement, a thermal bloom to his left. He pivoted, finger tensing on the trigger, but what emerged from the dark was not an enemy. It was a child. She could not have been more than 8 standard years, her body wrapped in torn industrial cloth, face streaked with soot. The rebreather she wore was cracked, its filters long expired. Her eyes, wide and pale, reflected the faint light from Coil's armor like mirrors. For a moment, neither moved. The child froze in terror, a small hand clutching a shard of metal like a weapon she didn't know how to use. Coil's bolter wavered, lowering slightly as he took a step forward. "Human," he said, his voice resonating through the Vox grill, heavy, distorted. "You live?" The girl flinched at the sound, her body trembling. She took a step back, stumbled on debris, and fell. The motion triggered something primal in Kale, not aggression, but instinctual protectiveness buried deep beneath decades of conditioning. He knelt, disengaging the bolter's maglock, setting it aside. The ground hissed under his weight. "I will not harm you," he said. "Do you understand?" Her breathing came in sharp bursts. Through the cracked rebreather, he could hear the faint hiss of its failure. Without it, she would suffocate before the day's end. Kale's mind moved automatically, recalling survival protocols, triage procedures. Astartes did not carry spare rebreathers for mortals. They were not meant to. His gauntleted hands hovered uncertainly before he reached for his utility harness. He detached a filtration seal from a damaged air canister, a field modification. Crude, temporary, but perhaps enough. He extended it toward her. She stared, uncomprehending, until his gesture grew firm. Finally, she crawled forward, small hands clutching the offered piece. He guided her as she replaced the broken filter. The hiss evened out. The girl's breath steadied. She looked up again, eyes wide, not with fear now, but something more difficult. Wonder. Carl saw himself reflected there, and for a heartbeat it felt unbearable. He rose to full height, towering over her. "There are others?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "They burned the sky," she whispered, her voice raw. "Everyone. Gone." The words pierced him deeper than any blade. Burned the sky. The phrase was simple, yet it carried the weight of divine wrath, the kind he had once believed to be mercy. He should have corrected her, reminded her that such purges were necessary, that faith demanded sacrifice. But the words caught in his throat. He could not lie, not now, not after seeing the charred bones of those his obedience had damned. Instead, he said only, "You will not die here." He activated his internal vox. "Command, this is Brother Sergeant Varen of the 2nd Company. I have located a civilian survivor. Request immediate extraction." Static. Nothing but the faint crackle of the warp's interference. The fleet was silent. He tried again, shifting frequencies, invoking every code he knew. Still nothing. The signal from earlier had vanished entirely. Either the command post was gone, or they had chosen not to answer. He looked down at the child. She was staring at his armor, at the purity seals burned to cinders, the sigil of his chapter half erased by flame. "Are you one of them?" she asked quietly. "One of who?" "The angels." The word struck him harder than any accusation. Angels, the name given by the faithful to the Astartes, the Emperor's chosen sons. He had once taken pride in it. Now it felt like mockery. "No," he said after a long silence. "Not anymore." The girl blinked, as if she hadn't understood, but she did not press. Instead, she moved closer, as though the sheer mass of him promised safety. Kyle felt her presence like a question he could not answer. He should have left her. His duty was to the mission, to the Codex, to the will of the Emperor. But standing there among the wreckage of obedience, duty seemed as hollow as the broken statues outside. He opened a channel to his armor's memory logs. The hololith flickered before his eyes. The last recorded message from Chaplain Ephrian before the strike. "Brothers, remember your oath. The Emperor watches. Purity is obedience. Doubt is death." Coil stared at those words as though they were a blade pressed to his throat. Purity is obedience. Doubt is death. And yet, what if doubt was the only thing that kept the soul alive? He closed the display and looked once more at the girl. "We leave," he said. Her small hand reached for his, resting against the blackened ceramite of his gauntlet. He allowed it. Together they stepped into the corridor, the echo of their movement swallowed by the vastness of the dead manufactorum. Behind them, the machines murmured faintly, a sound like prayer or warning. Call did not look back. The journey through the manufactorum's underbelly felt like moving through the carcass of a god. Vast arteries of rusted pipe and broken conduit coiled above them, dripping dark fluid that hissed on contact with Kale's armor. The girl followed close, her small steps barely audible against the grind of ceramite boots. Occasionally, the light from Kale's helm lamp would glance off a broken servo arm or a twisted gear column, casting momentary halos that vanished as quickly as they appeared. Every flicker revealed remnants of what this place once had been. A cathedral of labor, pulsing with the rhythm of industry, its workers chanting praise to the Omnissiah as machines sang their endless hymns. Now it was a tomb, its only song the whisper of leaking pressure valves and the slow decay of systems left to die. Coyle's thoughts moved in unwanted circles. He had seen ruin before. Countless worlds had burned under the cleansing fire of his bolter and the wrath of orbital guns. But this felt different. There had been something deliberate in the strike, something beyond strategy, beyond necessity. The precision of annihilation, the kind that left no room for chance. His mind, conditioned by centuries of discipline, tried to calculate variables, to assign cause and reason, none fit. The order had come from high command, possibly even through the Inquisition's channels, a sanctioned purge. But why now? Why here? The heretic stronghold had already fallen. The enemy had been scattered and broken. There was no logic in the timing. And then came the darker thought that logic had nothing to do with it. The girl stumbled. Coyle's reflexes were instant. He reached out, steadying her with one massive hand. She winced, not in pain, but in surprise at the sheer weight of his grip. He eased it, letting her catch her breath. Her face was pale beneath the grime, and he could see exhaustion drawing heavy shadows under her eyes. The air here was thin, fouled with toxins from ruptured coolant lines. She wouldn't last long without rest. They found shelter in a maintenance alcove, a narrow cavity half-shielded by fallen girders. Cale sealed the entrance with a slab of debris, leaving only a thin crack for air. He adjusted his armor's environmental regulators, shifting the vents to filter what oxygen remained. The faint hum of the suit filled the silence like the heartbeat of a dying machine. The girl huddled against the wall, clutching her knees, her breath audible through the mask. Cale removed his helm. The stale air struck him again, but he welcomed it. He set the helm down beside him and sat, the floor trembling under his weight. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the distant creak of the metal skeleton around them and the slow drip of condensation falling from a fractured coolant pipe. Finally, the girl asked, "What's your name?" He hesitated. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to him without title, without reverence or fear. "Kyle," he said at last. "Brother Sergeant Kyle Varen." She nodded, as though committing the words to memory. "I'm Lyra." A simple name, human, fragile. It felt like a relic from a time before the universe had gone mad. Kyle looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he saw humanity not as something to protect, not as an abstraction in a catechism, but as something alive and trembling before him. He thought of the gene seed within his chest, the Emperor's gift that made him more than man, and wondered if that gift had stolen from him the ability to understand what he was meant to defend. "Lyra," he said, testing the name like a prayer. "Your family." "They're gone," she interrupted softly. There was no anger in her voice, no plea for pity, only fact, plain and resigned. "They said the angels would save us. They were wrong." Kyle closed his eyes. The words struck deeper than she could know. He thought of the oaths, the ceremonies, the sacred trials that forged him into what he was. The burning of the flesh, the grafting of organs, the endless litanies that promised purpose in exchange for self. He remembered the Reclusium's black marble hall, the golden light reflecting off the statues of their gene sire, and the voice of the chaplain declaring, "You are his wrath made manifest. Your heart is not your own." But as he sat in the half-dark beside a frightened child, Coyle felt his heart beating with something that no litany had prepared him for. Lyra's voice broke the silence again. Why did they burn it all? He looked up. Because they were told to. By who? He almost said the Emperor, but the word caught in his throat. It felt blasphemous to place that truth, or lie, upon the lips of a child. By those who believe they speak for him, he said instead. Lyra frowned. "Do you believe them?" Cole opened his mouth to answer, then stopped. The truth was too heavy. He turned his gaze toward the faint glimmer of light slipping through the crack in the debris, watching the dust move in its glow. "Once," he said quietly, "I believed many things." She seemed to sense the end of the conversation and leaned her head against the wall, exhaustion pulling her into sleep. Cole watched over her, the weight of his bolter across his lap. The silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. In the far distance, the faint thrum of ship engines echoed, low orbit perhaps. Extraction teams or purgation squads. He didn't know which. He thought of the Codex Astartes, of its endless pages of duty, honor, and restraint. It had always seemed so absolute. But now the words felt hollow, stripped of the purpose that had once animated them. Protect the Imperium, serve the Emperor, obey without question. He had obeyed, and in doing so had destroyed what he was meant to protect. Cale reached down, unclasping one of the purity seals still clinging to his armor. The parchment was scorched, the ink nearly gone. He read the faint surviving lines, a benediction written in his own hand centuries ago. "By his will, I am the flame that cleanses. By his mercy, I burn only the impure." He stared at it for a long time before crushing it in his fist. The parchment disintegrated, its ashes falling to the ground between his boots. Outside, thunder rolled, not from the sky, but from the distant detonation of collapsing structures. The manufactorum was dying. The sound carried like the closing of a chapter, a slow, grinding finality that left no doubt this place, this world, would soon be erased completely. Cole looked once more at Lyra, sleeping amid the ruin, and felt the faintest tremor of something he had almost forgotten. Purpose not born of command, but of choice. He would not let her die here, not while he still drew breath. When dawn finally crept through the fractures of the manufactorum's shattered ceiling, it did so with the pallid light of a dying star. The sun here was veiled behind 1,000 kilometers of ash and orbital debris, its warmth smothered by the ghosts of the fleet that had unleashed ruin upon the surface. Cole stood at the edge of a collapsed gantry, looking out over what remained of the city. From here, he could see the valley beyond the industrial sprawl, a vast, cratered plain stretching toward the horizon, where black columns of smoke rose like silent pillars to the heavens. Nothing moved out there. The land itself seemed ashamed to exist. Lyra stirred behind him, coughing softly. Her rebreather whined with effort. Cole adjusted its valve again, rationing what clean air his armor could cycle for her. She thanked him with a small nod, the kind that belonged to someone too young to understand gratitude, but old enough to sense its necessity. He glanced once more at the horizon, then back to her. "We go east," he said. "There may still be shelter beyond the old transit tunnels." She didn't ask how he knew. In truth, he didn't. The words came as instinct, the kind of direction that needed no logic, only motion. He had learned long ago that purpose, even false purpose, was sometimes the only thing that kept the mind from collapsing under the weight of endless war. They moved through the ruins, the world around them creaking like an old machine dying in its sleep. Cole's armor left deep impressions in the ash, footprints that filled with gray dust seconds after he passed. The girl followed closely, clutching the hem of his scorched tabard as if it were the last solid thing in existence. At times, the silence was broken by faint noises, not mechanical, but organic. Shifts of rubble, distant moans. Survivors, perhaps. Or something worse. Cale's bolter was ready, his senses honed to a predator's precision. They passed a row of shattered hab units, their interiors open to the elements. A mummified arm jutted from beneath a collapsed wall, the skin blackened but still clinging to bone. The sight drew no horror from Kale, only recognition. Death had become as common as breath in the Imperium. What unsettled him now was not the dead, but the living. They reached the edge of the industrial quarter by midday. A great trench cut through the ground ahead, a scar left by the orbital bombardment. Beyond it, the shell of a transit terminal leaned at a crooked angle, its spires half-submerged in molten glass. Coyle scanned the distance through his helm's optics. Heat signatures flickered faintly, movement small and erratic. Not servitors, not loyalist beacons either. Lyra tugged on his gauntlet. "What is it?" she whispered. "Unknown," he said. "Stay behind me." They crossed the trench carefully, Kale's armor locking with each jump as he descended the uneven slope. The ground was hot, still faintly molten in places. He could feel the radiation biting at the seals of his armor. The girl coughed again, her voice weak. He turned, scooping her up with one arm. She was light, too light, like the shell of a bird. Inside the terminal's shadow, the light dimmed to twilight. The air was cooler here, though heavy with the stench of decay. Rows of broken transit vehicles lay in twisted heaps, their hulls fused together. Coyle moved between them, silent as death, scanning every shadow. Then he heard it, a voice, human, male, low but desperate. "Anyone, by the throne, anyone, respond." Kale froze. The transmission came through an open Vox channel, barely discernible beneath static. He recognized the encryption pattern instantly. It was Imperial, his chapter's code. His heart quickened. He set Lyra down gently and keyed his helm to broadcast. "This is Brother Sergeant Varen, 2nd Company. Identify yourself." There was a pause, then a burst of static, followed by a reply. "Kale? Emperor's blood, it's you." The voice cracked, thick with relief and disbelief. "This is Brother Enoch. We thought you were gone with the strike. Praise be." Coyle's vision sharpened. Enoch, one of his squad leaders, steadfast, disciplined, devout. He had last seen him leading the Western assault line before the bombardment fell. "Location," Kyle demanded. "Sub-level 3 of the terminal. We've got wounded. The apothecary didn't make it. We've been holding position since the cleansing." The transmission wavered, then steadied. "Command says regroup at orbital coordinate Delta 9 once extraction teams arrive. We thought—" "Command?" Coyle interrupted. "You've received direct orders?" "Aye, from the chaplain himself. He lives, Kyle. The Reclusium Vox is active again. The Emperor preserves us yet." Kyle's jaw tightened. If Ephrion still lived, then the judgment had already begun. Chaplains were not known for mercy toward deviation, and Coyle's hesitation before the strike had not gone unnoticed. Even now, his failure to regroup might be marked as disobedience. But that no longer mattered. He looked down at Lyra. She was staring at him with wide, uncertain eyes. "Brother Enoch," Coyle said at last, "I'm inbound. Stand ready." He closed the channel before Enoch could reply. Lyra tugged his hand again. "Are they your friends?" "They were," he said. The descent into Sub-Level 3 was like walking into the mouth of the underworld. The stairs had collapsed, forcing Kale to carve a path through the wreckage with his strength alone. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the tunnels, loud enough to stir movement in the shadows. Lyra clung to his back, silent now, her breath trembling against the seal of his armor. When they reached the lower level, the light grew dimmer still. Emergency lumens flickered weakly along the corridor walls. At its far end, Kale saw figures, armored, massive, marked by the insignia of his chapter. He felt the familiar pull of belonging, the reflexive comfort of brotherhood. Then he saw what they were doing. A group of Astartes stood around a pile of bodies, civilians, their forms twisted and blackened. One Marine knelt, carving a purity symbol into the wall above them. Another poured promethium across the corpses, his voice intoning the litany of cleansing. The flames caught with a dull roar. The stench was immediate, overpowering. Coil's stomach turned. These were not executions. These were ritual burnings, purges of the unclean, the innocent among the heretic. One of the Marines turned, his helm locking onto Cale. "Brother Sergeant," he called, his voice booming with authority. "By the throne you live." Cale stepped forward, Lyra still hidden behind his leg. "Brother Enoch," he said evenly, "report." Enoch strode closer, helm retracting to reveal a face blackened by soot, but alive with fervor. "We thought all lost, but praise be. Your return is proof the Emperor's will endures." His gaze shifted, then hardened. "You have a civilian." Coil's voice was calm. "She survived the bombardment. She is under my protection." Enoch's eyes flicked with disbelief. "Brother Sergeant, you know the decree. No survivors. Contamination protocols are clear." Cale's silence stretched between them like a blade. The firelight cast his armor in hues of gold and blood. "I know the decree," he said finally, "and I reject it." The words struck the air like thunder. The other Marines turned, disbelief rippling through their ranks. Enoch's expression shifted from confusion to fury. "You what?" Coil stepped closer. "You heard me. There is no heresy in mercy." Enoch's bolter rose, slow and deliberate. "You question the will of the Emperor?" "I question those who claim to speak it." The silence that followed was absolute, the kind that comes before the breaking of worlds. The other Marines began to move, forming a half circle around him. The fire behind them burned brighter, its heat pressing against the air. Lyra's small hand clutched Kyle's leg, trembling. Kyle's voice was low, steady, but filled with something unrecognizable, conviction born not of faith, but of loss. "You've forgotten what we were meant to be." Enoch's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you are lost to us, brother." Kyle moved before the sound of the first shot. The chamber erupted in fire and thunder. The first bolt round screamed past Kyle's head and exploded against the ferrocrete pillar behind him, showering the corridor with shards of burning metal. He lunged forward, his armor's servos roaring to life, moving faster than any mortal eye could follow. His gauntlet struck Enoch's bolter aside just as the second shot tore through the air. The round detonated against the wall, painting the darkness with a brief, searing bloom of light. In that flicker, Cale saw his brothers' faces, not as enemies but as zealots, each one blind with a faith that had replaced reason. They came at him together, 3, then 4, their chainswords screaming. Cole parried the first strike with the flat of his vambrace, sparks flaring between the teeth of the blade and the blessed ceramite of his armor. He caught the next with his shoulder, the edge biting deep but not breaking through. His counterattack was precise, almost merciful. A single backhanded blow that sent one brother sprawling, helm crushed inwards. Another came from the side, roaring a battle hymn, but Cole pivoted, bringing his elbow down like a hammer into the Marine's chest. The impact cracked ribs, dented armor, and drove the breath from the man's lungs in a burst of static. Enoch fell back, shouting orders through the vox, his voice distorted with rage. "He's turned, he's fallen, by the throne, purge him." The words struck harder than any weapon. Fallen. The label burned through Cale's mind like acid. Once, that word had been his greatest fear. Now, it sounded like truth. He reached for his bolter, swung it up, and fired. The explosive rounds tore through ceramite and flesh alike, turning 2 of his brothers into mist and echoes. The sound filled the corridor, deafening even through the helmet's dampeners. The recoil thudded through his arms like a heartbeat. Call advanced, each step deliberate, each shot clean, surgical. He did not cry out in rage or triumph. He moved with the precision of inevitability. Lyra was crouched in the corner, hands over her ears, eyes wide with terror. The flames from the burning bodies painted her an orange light, her face streaked with soot and tears. Kale caught sight of her just as another bolt round whistled past, clipping his pauldron. He turned, his return fire obliterating the shooter. Silence followed, sudden and absolute, broken only by the crackle of burning flesh. Only Enoch remained. He stood amid the carnage, helm retracted, eyes wild with disbelief. "Kale," he breathed, lowering his weapon slightly. "What have you done?" Kale's voice was low, hollow. "What had to be done? You've damned yourself. You've damned us all. Then let me carry that weight." Enoch shook his head, despair and fury twisting his features. "You swore an oath." Kale stepped closer, stopping just short of him. "Aye," he said softly. "To protect the innocent, to shield humanity. Tell me, brother." He gestured toward Lyra. "Is she not of the Emperor's creation?" For a moment, something flickered in Enoch's eyes. Doubt, brief but real. Then it vanished beneath the hard steel of doctrine. "You've been touched by the warp," he spat. "I see it now. You've lost the Emperor's light." Call could have argued, could have tried to reason, but he saw the truth written there. Nothing he said would matter. Faith had long ago replaced thought. "I'm sorry, Enoch," he murmured. The last shot echoed like a benediction. When it was over, Cole stood among the dead. The firelight glinted on the blood that streaked his armor. He reloaded his bolter with automatic precision, the ritual motions of a lifetime of war. Then he turned and walked to Lyra. She was shaking, her small body pressed against the wall, but she didn't pull away when he knelt. "It's over," he said. Her voice was small, trembling. "They were like you." He hesitated, then nodded. "They were. Then, why?" Cole looked at the fallen, their bodies lying amid the ashes of the very people they had sworn to protect. "Because they remembered only obedience," he said, the words quiet, almost to himself, "and forgot mercy." He rose and lifted her into his arms. She clung to him now, not in fear, but because there was no one else left to hold. He could feel her heartbeat through the scorched fabric of her clothes, rapid, human, alive. That fragile rhythm felt louder than any hymn. The corridor behind him burned, consuming what remained of the fallen. Kyle did not look back. He walked into the deeper dark, guided only by the faint pulse of life in his arms. As they moved through the lower tunnels, the silence changed. It was no longer the silence of death, but of something waiting, vast and unknowable. The hum of power conduits thrummed faintly through the walls, resonating with his armor's systems. Somewhere far above, the orbital ships still hung in low atmosphere, their engines distant thunder. He imagined them watching, their sensors marking his position, already writing his name among the condemned. But he no longer cared. His path had already diverged from theirs. The oath was broken, but in its breaking something new had been forged, something raw and uncertain, but alive. When they emerged from the sublevels at last, the light struck them like revelation. The sky was a molten smear of gold and gray, the air thick with ash that glowed faintly in the sun's dying light. The world was ruined, yet beautiful in its desolation. Kyle stood there, his armor blackened and scarred, the child held against his chest, and for the first time since the bombardment, he felt something like purpose. He looked to the east, where the mountains cut against the haze. beyond them, the signal of the Astronomicon shimmered faintly through the warp, a distant beacon of faith and fire. Once, he would have taken comfort in its presence. Now, it felt like judgment. Lyra stirred in his arms. "Where will we go?" she whispered. Call's gaze remained fixed on the horizon. "Where they won't find us," he said. "Where the Emperor's light no longer burns so bright that it blinds." She was silent for a long time, then said softly, "Are we running from him?" Call shook his head. "No, little one. We're walking toward what he's forgotten." The words lingered between them, fragile as prayer. Above, the wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest echo, a voice or perhaps only the memory of one. "Brother Varen, repent, return." It was gone as soon as it came, swallowed by distance. Call adjusted his grip on Lyra and began to walk. The ash rose around his boots like mist, and behind him, the last embers of the manufactorum died. He did not look back. The oath was remembered, and broken, and born anew. If the tale moves you, if the echoes of his choice linger beyond this moment, then lend your voice to it. Share it. Let it reach others who walk the thin line between duty and damnation. Subscribe to the archive, that these forbidden stories may not vanish into static and void, for remembrance itself is an act of defiance. The ash plains stretched before them for days, endless and gray, like the remains of a burned-out dream. Each sunrise brought no warmth, only a pallid light filtered through a sky that seemed perpetually bruised. The world had been scoured clean, of life, of color, of purpose. Cale Varen walked without rest, his armor a weight he had once borne with pride, now felt like penance. The joints hissed and groaned with every step, coated in grime and melted dust. The child, Lyra, rode against his chest plate, her breathing shallow but steady. He rationed what little water remained in his armor's filtration system, letting her drink in small sips from a tube meant for battlefield stimulants. Each time she took one, she thanked him, always softly, always as if the act itself were holy. By the third day, they reached the skeletal remains of an old agri complex. The towers here had once fed thousands, vast silos of grain and nutrient slurry now hollowed out, their outer plating blackened by fire. Wind moaned through the structures like the sighs of ghosts. Cole stopped beneath one and set Lyra down. She could barely stand, her legs trembling from exhaustion. He knelt beside her, removing his helm. The air was thinner here but marginally cleaner. "Rest," he said. She nodded, sitting beside the base of a silo. Her small fingers traced the sigil etched into his shoulder plate, the faint remains of his chapter's emblem. "What does it mean?" she asked. Cale looked at it. Once, that symbol had filled him with pride, the twin suns crossed by the Emperor's blade. It had meant honor, brotherhood, eternity and service. Now it looked to him like a wound that refused to close. "It meant loyalty," he said. "To who?" He hesitated. The answer should have been simple. It wasn't. "To something greater than ourselves," he said finally. Lyra tilted her head. "But isn't that what you still do?" Call stared at her for a long time. "Perhaps," he murmured. "But sometimes what is greater forgets what is small." She didn't understand, and he didn't expect her to. He rose, scanning the horizon through his helm's optics. No Vox signals, no life signs, no movement beyond the drift of the wind. They were alone. But isolation did not mean safety. The Imperium had many eyes, and worse things than eyes. That night, the dreams returned. He saw the Chapel of Oaths again, the black marble gleaming with oil and sanctified wax, the candles burning with blue flame. He stood before Chaplain Ephrion, his crozius blazing, the voice of command echoing like thunder. "You are not men. You are purpose-given flesh, the Emperor's word made iron." He remembered the moment of the oath itself, the ceremonial blade pressed against his palm, the blood offered to the reliquary flame. He had felt proud then, unbreakable, pure. And then the fire changed. The blue flame turned red, the reliquary shattered, and from within its light came the screams of the innocent, the same screams that now haunted his every waking moment. He saw himself kneeling before the Emperor's statue, his hands drenched not in blood of the heretic but of the helpless. The golden eyes of the statue wept oil, and its lips moved in silence. When Kyle woke, the air was cold. His armor sensors reported movement beyond the ruins, faint, deliberate. He rose without sound, lifting Lyra into a shadowed alcove. She stirred, half-conscious, as he activated his helm and scanned the perimeter. At first, he saw nothing. Then, from behind a shattered silo, figures emerged, thin, mechanical, cloaked in tattered robes. The metallic stench reached him before their voices did. Sciteri, explorators of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Their forms were angular, their limbs a blend of bone and machine. Optics glowed in the gloom like dying stars. One stepped forward, its vox grill sputtering. Designation: unidentified Astartes. Authorization code required. Kale's instincts flared. "I am Brother Sergeant Cole Varan of the..." He stopped himself before naming his chapter. The code was already death. "Of the Emperor's service. Mission compromised. Requesting safe conduct." The Sciteri paused, cogitators whirring audibly. "Mission parameters invalid. Planet designated for purification. Organic presence unauthorized." Kale tightened his grip on his bolter. "There is a child under my protection." The response was instantaneous. Biological contamination confirmed, subject designated for termination. He raised his weapon even before the last syllable left its vox. The first shot tore through the lead Sciterius's chest, the explosive, round-shredding metal and flesh alike. The others reacted with mechanical precision, lass fire cutting through the night like scarlet rain. Cole moved between bursts, his armor shrugging off the weaker strikes. He returned fire in short, brutal bursts, every round a prayer for survival, every detonation another heresy added to the tally against his name. The battle was short, vicious. When it ended, the air stank of ozone and burned circuitry. Cole stood among the wreckage, breathing heavily, his armor smoking from repeated impacts. The last Sciterius twitched on the ground, its vox emitting static whispers of machine prayer. "Forgive us, Omnissiah." Purity of function restored. Kyle silenced it with a final shot. Lyra emerged from the shadows, trembling. "Are they gone?" He turned to her, his voice low. "They are." She looked at the bodies, her small face unreadable. They sounded sad. Kyle paused. The thought had not occurred to him. "Machines do not feel sorrow," he said automatically. Lyra frowned. "Then why did they ask to be forgiven?" He didn't answer. The question lingered in his mind long after they left the ruins. It followed him through the cold valleys, through the silence of the plains, through the endless march toward an uncertain horizon. Forgiveness. The word burned in him like an ember. Could an Astartes even ask for such a thing? Or was he, by design, by creed, incapable of it? That night, they took shelter in the husk of an old transport vehicle. Lyra slept wrapped in his torn tabard, her breathing steady. Cole sat beside her, helm off, staring into the distance where the clouds shimmered faintly with the reflection of orbiting ships. The fleet still watched. Perhaps the chaplain still prayed for his death. He activated his vox not to transmit but to listen. Through the static, faint echoes drifted, fragments of sermons, command codes, the endless repetition of imperial catechism. He knew them all by heart, yet now they sounded like the ravings of madmen preaching to an empty universe. By his will we serve, by his word we kill, by his hand we are unmade. He repeated it under his breath, and the words turned hollow in his mouth. Once they had been his strength. Now they were chains. He looked down at Lyra, small, fragile, untouched by doctrine, and something shifted inside him, subtle but irrevocable. The fracture widened, not a clean break, but a slow, spreading wound that reached deeper than flesh or bone. He wondered if this was what heresy felt like, not fire, not madness, but clarity. By the fifth night, the air had grown heavier. The world itself seemed to thrum beneath Coil's boots, a deep, unseen pulse that spoke of things buried. Old machines, dead gods, or the quiet heartbeat of the planet itself. The sky above remained the same slate-gray expanse, but now lightning flickered along the horizon, illuminating the jagged silhouettes of distant ruins. Coil and Lyra walked beneath that fractured firmament, guided by the faint whisper of static that still haunted his vox, as though the universe refused to let him forget what he had been. They reached the edge of a broken causeway, a bridge that had once spanned a river of molten coolant, now long hardened to glass. Beneath it, the black water reflected what light remained, an imitation of the heavens. Coil paused there, scanning the distance. His sensors pinged faint energy readings, erratic, far ahead. He crouched, one knee grinding against the ash-slick stone, and magnified his vision. What he saw was impossible. A camp. Flickering lumens. Heat sources. Movement. Humans. He felt his heart quicken. Survivors were rare after such cleansing, rarer still after Mechanicus execution squads had passed. He motioned for Lyra to stay close, and together they moved down the incline, steps silent, his bolter cradled in readiness. The nearer they came, the more distinct the sounds became. Murmured speech, the crackle of a fire, the faint hum of machinery that had no right still to live. The camp was small, hidden within the shell of a collapsed freight depot. There were perhaps a dozen of them, ragged, soot-faced men and women, their clothing the scavenged remnants of industrial uniforms. Some bore crude weapons, others just tools. And near the center, hunched over a console salvaged from a transport wreck, was a man in tattered priest's robes, his voice a low chant. Coil stepped into the firelight. The murmurs ceased instantly. Weapons, if they could be called such, were raised. Fear spread through the group like frost. The priest turned, eyes wide beneath a hood rimmed with soot. "Emperor's mercy," he whispered. "Anastartes." Coil lowered his bolter slowly, his voice calm. "Do not fear. I am not here to harm you." The priest took a step forward, disbelief and awe warring in his expression. "You survived the cleansing?" "Yes." The man swallowed hard. "Then, you are the Emperor's vengeance. You've come to deliver us." Kyle looked around at the hollow faces, the gaunt eyes staring at him as though salvation had just walked out of the storm. He wanted to tell them the truth, that salvation was no longer something he could offer, that the hands which had once been instruments of deliverance were now soaked in the blood of their kind. But the words wouldn't come. "I came upon a child," he said instead, motioning to Lyra. "She survived. Others may have, but the Mechanicus hunts anything that breathes." The priest nodded, his lips trembling. "We've seen their scouts. They burn the dead and mark the living. We've hidden here for weeks, praying for the Emperor's deliverance." Kyle's jaw tightened. Deliverance. The word tasted bitter. He looked at the dying fire between them, its light flickering against his armor's scarred surface. "The Emperor's will," he began, then stopped. "The Emperor's will is not always clear," the priest frowned. "You speak as though you doubt." Kyle met his gaze. "I have seen obedience lead to extinction. I have seen faith twisted into justification for slaughter. Tell me, priest, is that doubt or truth?" The man hesitated. His eyes flickered toward the others, their faces pale and waiting. Then, softly, "We are told to trust that his plan is beyond us, that to question is sin. And yet," Kyle said, "you still breathe." A silence fell over the camp. The priest looked at him, understanding dawning behind the fear. "You defied them. I refused to kill a child." The words dropped like a blade. The others shifted, glancing toward Lyra. The priest's voice trembled when he spoke again. "Then you are hunted." Kyle nodded once. "Aye." For a long time, no one moved. Then the priest motioned toward a corner of the camp. "You and the girl can rest here. We have little to offer, but what we have is yours." Kyle inclined his head in silent acknowledgement. He sat near the fire, removing his helm. The warmth against his face felt alien after so much cold. Lyra settled beside him, her small hand resting lightly against his gauntlet. Around them, the survivors whispered prayers. Kyle listened, not to the words, but to the rhythm, the cadence of human desperation. There was something achingly familiar in it. Once, he too had prayed like that, before he learned that prayers sometimes echoed back only in silence. Later, when the camp had quieted and most had fallen into uneasy sleep, the priest approached him again. He carried a small data slate, its screen cracked but functional. "I kept records," he said softly, "from before the strike. Names, families, those who sought refuge. The administratum called it containment, but it was extermination." He offered the slate. Kyle took it, the device fragile in his hand. The data within was minimal, corrupted fragments of identification numbers, Vox transcripts, and one last message labeled Purification Directive. He read the opening line and felt the breath leave his chest. By decree of Ordo Hereticus, planetary cleansing authorized. Deviations within Imperial Creed exceed tolerable variance. All population segments to be reclassified as heretical. Kale stared at the text until the symbols blurred. So it had been the Inquisition. Not chaos, not rebellion, not even rebellion of doctrine, just deviation. Some variation of prayer, some failure of bureaucratic purity. 1,000 souls burned for the sin of imperfection. He handed the slate back without a word. The priest looked at him, searching his face for something. Reassurance, fury, faith. He found none. "I once believed," Kyle said quietly, "that to question the Emperor's will was the greatest heresy. Now, I wonder if obedience is worse." The priest's eyes widened. "Careful, brother. Those are dangerous words." Kyle almost smiled. "So is truth." When the priest left, Kyle looked up at the sky. Lightning flared along the horizon again, white against the clouds. It looked like the veins of a dying giant, its heart still trying to beat. He thought of the Astronomican's light, pulsing across the warp, and of how many like him were still out there. Soldiers who obeyed without question, who would never see the faces of those they destroyed. Lyra stirred beside him. "Kyle?" "Yes?" "Why did they do it?" He looked at her, at the smudge of soot on her cheek, the small, tired eyes. "Because they are afraid," he said. "Of what?" "Of being wrong." She thought about that, then drifted back to sleep. Cole watched the fire burn low, the last embers curling into smoke. The fracture inside him widened again, and with it came a quiet realization he could never return. Not to his chapter, not to the Imperium. The moment he had spared the girl, he had crossed a line that no confession could cleanse. But perhaps, he thought, as he looked at her sleeping form, crossing that line had been the first truly human act he had ever made. And somewhere, far above, amid the distant thunder of ships, a voice whispered through the static, "Brother Varen, your trial has begun." When Cole woke, dawn had already turned the sky to iron. The air felt colder than it had any right to be, the kind of chill that sank through ceramite and bone alike. The camp was restless. Whispers moved like infection through the survivors, rumors of movement to the west, of search parties marked by the sigils of the Inquisition. The priest's face was drawn and pale when he came to Kale. "We can't stay," he said. "They'll find us by nightfall." Kale nodded once. He had known this moment would come. He rose, the weight of his armor settling upon him like an old guilt, and looked toward the distant haze where black ships might already be descending. He could almost feel the hum of their engines through the soil, a deep vibration that lived in the bones rather than the air. "Gather what you can carry," he said. "We leave now." The refugees obeyed without question. Some clutched relics. Others clung to tools or trinkets that meant nothing to survival, but everything to memory. Kale watched them move with a kind of detached reverence. Mortals, fragile, flawed, and yet somehow still defiant. He had forgotten what that looked like. Lyra stood beside him, her hand gripping the strap of a battered pack nearly as large as she was. "Are they coming for you?" she asked. Kale looked down at her. "They're coming for all of us," he said, "but they'll say it's for me." She frowned, as though trying to make sense of the unfairness of it. "Will you fight them?" "If I must. And if you don't?" Kale paused. The question was so simple, yet it held the weight of something vast. "Then I will keep you safe," he said finally. "That is enough." They moved eastward, away from the ruins, through fields of fused glass and twisted steel. The ground cracked beneath their feet, thin layers of ash giving way to veins of molten amber that pulsed faintly in the half-light. The planet itself seemed to bleed beneath the sun. Gaul walked at the head of the column, his armor's servos groaning with every motion. His sensors pinged intermittently, faint warp interference, a signal that felt too deliberate to be chance. By midday, they reached the remnants of a monorail line that cut across the plains like a scar. It had once carried workers from the city to the manufactorums, a river of industry now frozen in decay. The tracks were warped, the pillars collapsed, but beneath one of the shattered arches, Cole found an opening, a tunnel leading into the underground network below. Shelter for a time. They descended into the dark. The air grew thick and damp, heavy with the smell of oil and rust. The refugees lit makeshift torches from scavenged fuel. Their light danced across walls covered in the faded symbols of the Mechanicus and the Imperial Aquila. Here, even the marks of devotion were corroded. Coyle walked in silence, scanning the shadows. His auspex registered faint movement, not near, but not distant either. At the far end of the tunnel, the air opened into a vast chamber. It had once been a control nexus, banks of consoles and cogitators, now silent, surrounded by the husks of maintenance servitors long since deactivated. The priest crossed himself as he entered. "This place was blessed by the Omnissiah," he murmured. "Perhaps his spirit still lingers." Kale doubted it. The Omnissiah was not known for mercy, but he said nothing. The refugees settled along the chamber's edges, resting, whispering prayers. Lyra sat near the center, her small figure dwarfed by the hulks of broken machines. She looked at Kale and smiled, a rare thing, faint but real. "It's quiet," she said. He nodded. "For now." That quiet lasted less than an hour. The first sign came as a tremor beneath their feet, subtle but growing. Kyle's helm lenses flared as he scanned the tunnel. Heat signatures, many moving fast. His vox crackled with static, and through it came a voice he knew. "Brother Varen." He froze. The tone was unmistakable, cold, resonant, filled with the authority of faith. "Chaplain Ephrion," Coil said aloud, his voice low. The priest looked up, alarmed. "Who is that?" Coil didn't answer. He was already moving, motioning the others back. The voice came again, closer now, carried on the echoing air. "Brother Varen, by decree of the Reclusium and authority of the Holy Ordos, you are commanded to submit yourself for judgment. Do not resist. Your death will be a mercy." Lyra stood, fear flickering in her eyes. "It's them, isn't it?" Coil's hand found her shoulder, steadying her. "Stay behind me." A beam of light lanced through the tunnel entrance. Then came the footsteps, heavy, synchronized, unmistakably Astartes. Half a dozen figures emerged from the darkness, their armor unscarred and gleaming, purity seals fluttering like banners in the stale air. At their center walked Chaplain Ephrion, Crozius Arcanum held like a relic of judgment. His skull helm reflected the torchlight, eyes burning with golden luminescence. Coil stepped forward to meet him. "Brother Varen," Ephrion intoned, "you have forsaken your oaths, you have consorted with the impure, you have turned from the Emperor's light. Speak your final confession." Coil stood tall, his voice calm. "I have done only what conscience demanded. There is no conscience but his will. And his will," Coil said, "is twisted by those who claim to know it." Ephrion's Crozius hummed with energy. "You blaspheme even now." "I speak truth. You murdered your brothers." "I buried them," Kale said. "Their faith was already dead." The chaplain's voice rose like a sermon to the heavens. "You are a stain upon his image, a lesson to all who would falter." Kale drew his bolter. The act was slow, deliberate, not defiant but inevitable. Around them, the air grew charged, the refugees frozen in terror. Lyra stood behind him, silent, her eyes fixed on the giant forms before her. Ephrion raised his Crozius high. "Then let your soul burn clean." Coil spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else. "No soul burns clean." The first blow of the Crozius struck like thunder. Coil blocked it with his forearm, the impact shattering the armor's plating and driving him to one knee. The next strike came from the left, another Astartes, a brother whose name Coil remembered but could not bear to speak. He parried, countered, and drove his fist into the Marine's chest with enough force to crack ceramite. The fight became a storm, bolter fire roaring through the chamber, the screams of mortals drowned in the clash of gods. Coil moved with grim precision, each motion a memory of training turned against everything it once served. He fought not to win, but to survive, to protect the single fragile life behind him. Ephrion's voice rose above it all, reciting litanies between strikes, each word a wound. "The Emperor watches, the Emperor judges, the Emperor purifies." Coil caught the chaplain's arm, forced it aside and slammed his helm against Ephrion's. The impact shattered one of the chaplain's optic lenses, sending him reeling. "Then let him watch," Coil growled, "and see what his mercy has become." They crashed together amid the ruin, faith and doubt locked in battle. Around them, fire spread from ruptured promethium lines, filling the chamber with smoke and the scent of burning machine oil. The refugees fled into the tunnels, screaming. Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, a single cry, small but piercing. Coil turned. In that instant, Ephrian's Crozius struck. The blow tore through his pauldron, breaking bone and sending him sprawling. His bolter clattered across the floor. Pain roared through him, but he forced himself to rise. The chaplain advanced, flames reflecting in his cracked lens. "Confess," he commanded, "and your death will have meaning." Kyle's voice was raw, barely human. Meaning died with obedience. And then, as the chamber shook, the ceiling began to give way. A single supporting beam snapped with a sound like the breaking of a spine. Rubble rained down. Cole lunged forward, grabbing Lyra as the structure collapsed. The world became fire, ash, and thunder. When the dust settled, silence returned, the kind that followed annihilation. Ephrian's body lay pinned beneath fallen stone, his Crozius flickering weakly beside him. Cole, bleeding, half-buried, pushed himself free. His armor was fractured beyond repair. He looked down at Lyra, alive, barely conscious, dust covering her like snow. He lifted her gently, holding her close. Behind him, Ephrian stirred, his voice faint but still burning with conviction. "You can't run from him, brother." Cale turned, his shadow cast long against the smoke. "I'm not running," he said. "I'm remembering." He left the chaplain to die. And as he carried Lyra deeper into the tunnels, he felt something within him finally break. Not his faith, but the illusion that it had ever been whole. The tunnels ran deeper than Cale had ever imagined. A labyrinth of forgotten arteries carved beneath the world's dead heart. No light reached this far. Even the glow from his armor's lumen strips seemed to shrink against the dark. The air was thick with dust and machine oil, every breath tasting of rust and memory. Lyra clung to him, half-conscious, her weight small but steady against his chest. He walked without destination, guided only by instinct, and by the soft, unending whisper that haunted the edges of his vox. "Brother Varen, repent, return." He had learned not to answer it. The voice sounded like his chaplain, like Ephrian, but also like something older, something that waited behind the static of faith. Sometimes, when the tunnel walls pulsed faintly with the ghostlight of ancient circuitry, the voice changed tone, no longer commanding but pleading. "Come home, son. The Emperor forgives." Those words cut deeper than any blade. He did not know if they were truth, hallucination, or the echo of his own guilt bleeding through a broken link. But he kept moving. To stop was to listen, and to listen was to break. After hours, or perhaps days, time had no meaning here. The tunnel widened into an old transit hub. Its walls were carved with murals so ancient they had become fossilized beneath layers of grime. He brushed the soot away with a gauntleted hand. The figures beneath were of men and angels, not in armor, but in simple robes, their faces raised toward a golden light. Humanity before conquest, before fear, before the cult of obedience. Lyra stirred in his arms, eyes fluttering open. "Where are we?" "Below the cities," he said. "Below everything they built to keep men in the light." She frowned, not understanding, but her gaze lingered on the mural. "They look happy." He studied the image. They were allowed to be. He set her down gently, letting her rest against a half-collapsed column. His armor was cracked and scorched, servos whining in protest. He disengaged the damaged power lines along his arm, sparks flashing in the dark. He would need to repair it soon, but exhaustion had begun to settle into him. Not physical, but something deeper. His twin hearts beat slower than usual. The gene seed could only compensate for so much loss. Lyra's small voice broke the silence. "You're hurt. I've been worse." She reached out, touching the broken ceramite at his shoulder. "Can you still fight?" Kyle looked at her, at the strange calm in her eyes. It was not the calm of ignorance, but of acceptance, the kind that came when one had already seen the world end once. "If I must," he said, "but I would rather not." Her hand lingered a moment longer before she withdrew it. "Then don't." A simple command, delivered without the weight of hierarchy or creed, just a human plea. Kale almost smiled at the absurdity of how easily it pierced through centuries of conditioning. "You sound like someone who believes choice still exists." "It has to," she said. "Otherwise, what's the point?" He said nothing, because there was nothing to say. Later, when Lyra had fallen asleep again, Kale walked alone through the shadows of the transit chamber. His helm's sensors picked up faint energy pulses beneath the floor, ancient power sources, long dormant, still flickering in the dark. He followed them to a sealed door marked with the sigil of the Mechanicus and a faded Imperial Aquila. The mechanism was old, but his gauntlet strength was enough to pry it open. Beyond lay a chamber filled with faint blue light. At its center stood a massive device, part machine, part shrine. Cables hung from the ceiling like veins. A humanoid figure, no more than a skeleton of metal and wire, was fused into the console, its skull crowned with a halo of data ports. Its single optic glowed faintly as Cole entered. "Identity, Astartes," it rasped. "Designation, unconfirmed. Access level, revoked." Cole approached cautiously. "You are a servitor?" "Was," it said. "Once custodian of knowledge, now fragment." Its voice was hollow, ancient. "Why have you come, son of war?" Cole hesitated. "To survive." The servitor's optic dimmed, then flared again. "Survival is function without purpose. You were built for purpose." "I was built for obedience." "Obedience is function without thought." The words hung in the air like static. Kale's jaw tightened. Then what is thought without obedience? The servitor's head tilted. "Heresy." Kale almost laughed, a sound like rust grinding in his throat. "Then perhaps I am finally awake." The machine was silent for a moment. Then it said, "Many before you came. They spoke as you speak. They called it revelation. The Imperium called it sin." Cole stepped closer. What became of them? Erased. He looked down at the figure, this echo of something that had once been human, now entombed in circuitry. "Then remember me," he said quietly, "if memory is still within your function." The servitor's optic flickered weakly, as though trying to record his face. "Name? Kale Varen?" "Memory stored," it said. "Uncertain duration. Decay inevitable." Kale nodded once, almost reverently. "That's all any of us have." He turned to leave, but the servitor spoke again. "Astartes Kale Varen. Your genetic signature carries deviation." He froze. "Explain." "Your seed code, altered, fragmented, thread of unrecorded pattern." His breath caught. "By whose design?" "Unknown, not Mechanicus, not Ecclesiarch, not recorded. You are anomaly." He felt a strange pressure in his chest, not pain, but awareness. "What does it mean?" The servitor's optic dimmed. "Perhaps free will." Before Kale could speak, the optic went dark. The last hum of the machinery faded into silence. He stood there for a long time, surrounded by the ghosts of knowledge long forbidden. When he returned to Lyra, she was awake, staring into the gloom. "You were gone a long time," she said. "I found answers," he replied. "Did they help?" He shook his head. "No, but they changed the questions." They left the chamber behind, climbing through rusted shafts that led upward, toward a faint hint of light. As they ascended, Coil's vox crackled again. Faint, but clear enough to recognize. It was not the chaplain's voice this time, but something colder, mechanical, wrapped in authority. "This is Inquisitor Lyrian Thas. Subject, Kael Varan, Renegade Astartes. Orders confirmed. Termination authorized. All forces converge on coordinates 441 Theta." Kael exhaled slowly. The Inquisition had finally spoken his name aloud. The sin was no longer whispered. It was proclaimed. He looked at Lyra. "They know I live." She met his gaze without flinching. "Then we make them remember why." He almost smiled. "You speak like a soldier. I learned from one." Outside, lightning tore through the clouds again, illuminating the world in white fire. The storm was coming, not weather but judgment. Coil could feel it in the rhythm of his armor, in the faint hum of his broken gene seed, in the pull of something vast that waited unseen beyond the sky. And somewhere deep within him, beneath guilt and faith and all that had been carved into his soul, a new vow began to form, not to a god nor to an empire, but to the truth itself. He would speak what the Imperium dared not hear. He would live long enough to be remembered. They left the tunnels behind and rose into a night sky alive with stormlight. The clouds had thickened into vast sheets of black metal, each pulse of lightning flashing like the muzzle flare of distant guns. Rain fell in short, heavy bursts, hissing where it struck Coil's armor. The land before them was no longer ash but stone, ridged and split, carved by centuries of bombardment. The remnants of the city they had fled lay far behind, a bruise of orange on the horizon. Coil could almost taste the warp charge in the air. The storm above wasn't natural. Nothing in the Imperium's wrath ever was. Lyra walked beside him, her small frame wrapped in a tattered cloak scavenged from the refugees' camp. She was quiet, her eyes reflecting the storm. Coil carried the weight of silence between them. The silence of a man who had seen too much and yet could not stop remembering. The Inquisition had named him Heretic now, his life and death woven into the same decree. His brothers would hunt him until the galaxy itself went cold. They reached a plateau at dawn. From its edge, Coil could see the skeletal outline of a cathedral far in the distance, a silhouette against the burning sky. It must have been one of the great reliquary fortresses of the Ecclesiarchy, built into the mountain's side, a citadel of faith and fire. Even from here he could see its spires, jagged and defiant, each one crowned with golden flame. That was where the Inquisition would expect him to go. That was where judgment waited. He knew he would go anyway. Lyra followed his gaze. "What is that place?" "A shrine," he said. "Built to remember what the Emperor once was, or what they think he was." She looked up at him. "You said you're going there." "I have to." "Why?" Coil turned to her. "Because if I don't, they'll never stop hunting us. And because there's something there I must see." "What?" "The truth." She didn't understand, but she nodded. She had learned not to ask when the answers hurt more than silence. They began the ascent. The path wound upward through stone and ruin, past old statues whose faces had been eaten away by wind and time. The closer they drew, the more the air changed, thicker, heavier, humming faintly with the charge of unseen power. The storm above followed them, clouds circling like carrion birds. By the time they reached the outer gates, night had fallen again. The gates themselves were open, their metal scorched, as if by fire from within. Kael stepped through, his boots echoing in the hollow courtyard. The cathedral loomed before him, its entrance guarded by the statues of saints whose visages were carved in expressions of eternal agony. Above the great doors, words had been engraved into the stone. "His light burns forever." Inside, the air was alive with the hum of machinery. The walls glowed faintly with the light of ancient generators, still functioning despite centuries of decay. Rows of servo skulls drifted through the air like ghosts, their optics flaring as Coil entered. They hovered for a moment, scanning him, then retreated deeper into the cathedral's vast interior. Lyra followed close, her hand gripping the edge of his armor. "It's huge," she whispered. Kyle's voice echoed in the silence. It was built to remind men how small they are. They passed through the nave, where shattered pews lay in heaps, and relics of saints had been reduced to piles of gilded bone. The altar ahead still burned with faint light, not flame, but the glow of stored energy pulsing through its conduits. At its center stood a figure. She was tall, robed in black and gold, her face half hidden beneath a veil of chainmail. A rosette hung from her throat, the mark of the Inquisition. The symbol of the Ordo Hereticus gleamed on her breastplate. "Inquisitor Liren Thas," Kyle said, his voice level. She turned, her eyes, pale and cold, fixed on him with the calm certainty of one who already knew the outcome. "You should have died on the plains," she said. "You were offered mercy through fire, yet you persist." Cole took a step closer. "You sent the order." She inclined her head. "I executed his will. You burned the innocent." They were already impure. Doubt is contagion. It spreads. Kale's voice darkened. "So you burned a world to cure a thought. The Emperor's truth is not for the weak," she said. "And you, Astartes, were made to enforce that truth, not question it." Lyra stepped forward then, her voice small but clear. "He saved me." The Inquisitor's gaze flicked to her. A contamination spared is a seed of heresy planted. Kale's hand went to his bolter. "Say that again." The woman's expression did not change. "She should have died. You made her death your own." Kyle's weapon rose, the barrel steady. "Then perhaps it's time I collect it." The Inquisitor didn't flinch. "Do it, then. Prove that your rebellion is nothing but another kind of faith. Faith in yourself." The words struck deeper than she could have known. Coyle's finger tightened on the trigger, but he didn't fire. Instead, he lowered the weapon. "No," he said quietly. "You want me to become what you already believe I am. You want a monster to justify your mercy." Something flickered in her eyes, not doubt, but interest. "You think restraint absolves you?" "No," Kyle said, "but it remembers what you forgot." For a moment, neither moved. The storm outside thundered, lightning illuminating the stained glass in brief flashes of gold and crimson. Then, from the shadows behind the Inquisitor, the sound of heavy steps echoed, a squad of Adeptus Custodes, their armor gleaming like living suns. Coil froze. Custodians, the Emperor's own guardians. The sight of them filled him with something close to awe, close to terror. He had fought beside many legends, but these were not men. They were myth given form. Liren's voice was calm. "You see now why I came alone. You were never meant to walk away." Coil reached for Lyra, pushing her gently behind him. "Stay back." The Custodes advanced, their guardian spears raised, their eyes unreadable behind golden helms. Coil lifted his bolter. The sound of the storm filled the cathedral, mingling with the rising hum of power from the altar. For an instant, everything stood still. The warriors, the child, the Inquisitor's cold gaze. And then the world erupted in light. Bolter fire tore through the air, explosive shells meeting Oramite armor in flashes of molten gold. Kale moved with impossible speed, his training burning through instinct and desperation alike. Each shot, each motion was precision born of centuries, but even he could not match the Custodes in strength. Their blows were deliberate, divine, each one shaking the ground beneath his feet. He fought not to kill, but to delay, to keep Lyra alive, to buy a few more breaths against the inevitable. His armor shattered piece by piece, the ceramite breaking like brittle glass. Blood, his blood, streaked the floor in crimson arcs. Liren watched, unmoved. When the last of his ammunition ran dry, Coil threw the bolter aside. His vision blurred. His breath came in ragged bursts. One of the custodians advanced, spear raised. Coil caught it in both hands, the weapon's haft burning against his palms, and forced it downward. The motion sent a surge of agony through his wounded arm, but he held it. "If you are truly his sons," he growled, "then look at what your light has made." The custodian hesitated, not long, not enough to matter, but long enough for Cale to drive his knee into the joint of the warrior's armor, forcing him back. The brief pause was all he needed. He turned to Lyra. "Run." She shook her head, tears cutting through the ash on her cheeks. "Not without you." "Run!" he roared, and she did. The custodians closed in. Cole faced them with nothing but his fists and his fury. Each impact was an explosion of light and pain, each breath a prayer to a god who had never answered him. The Inquisitor's voice rose above the storm, calm and clear. "Call Varen. By decree of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition, you are condemned." He laughed then, a sound that was half a sob, half defiance. "Then let him condemn me himself." The last blow came like the fall of a star. The cathedral trembled, and silence followed. When the storm finally broke, and dawn crept once more through the shattered stained glass, Lyra was gone, lost in the mountains. The Inquisitors stood among the ruins, the custodies beside her, their armor scorched but unbroken. Of Cale Varen there was no sign, only shattered ceramite, and the faint, lingering sound of a voice that refused to die. No soul burns clean. There are silences in the galaxy that cannot be measured in seconds or years, but in the weight they leave behind. When Cale Varen awoke, it was into one of those silences. The light was dim, filtered through smoke and dust, the air so thick with it that even the sensors of his helm struggled to pierce the haze. His armor no longer felt like armor. It felt like a coffin. The power pack had failed, leaving only faint heat within its shell. He lay among shattered stone and bent iron. The remnants of the cathedral collapsed around him. Memory came slowly. The custode's blades, the Inquisitor's voice, the sound of the storm. He had fallen, he remembered that much. Not slain, not spared, but abandoned to the wreckage between death and whatever came after. He tried to move, but pain lanced through his ribs. Something in his chest was broken. Bone or gene seed casing, it didn't matter. He reached up, tore the cracked helm free, and drew his first breath of unfiltered air. It tasted of incense and blood. Above him, the vaulted ceiling had split open. Through the wound, the dawn bled across the ruins in a thin golden wash. The sun itself was veiled, half hidden by the clouds still heavy with ash, yet its light reached down like a reluctant mercy. Cale stared at it, feeling the warmth touch his face through grime and dried blood. It had been years, perhaps centuries, since he'd felt sunlight not refracted through armor glass. Somewhere close, a servo skull drifted through the wreckage, its optics flickering weakly. It buzzed like an insect, drawn to him by programming older than memory. Cale lifted a hand, crushing it mid-flight with a lazy swipe. The fragments fell beside him, scattering like brittle bones. Then came the sound, faint, rhythmic. Footsteps. Human. He tensed, though there was little left in him that could fight. The footsteps drew closer until a figure appeared through the smoke. It was a man, hooded, robes torn and covered in ash, carrying a staff of beaten metal. His eyes were pale and fever-bright. A pilgrim, Kyle thought. One of the countless who wandered the ruins of dead worlds searching for the Emperor's presence in the dirt. When the pilgrim saw him, he froze. "Saints preserve," he whispered. "An angel of death." Kyle's voice was rough, every word scraping his throat. "No angel," he said. The man hesitated, then fell to his knees in the dust. "We saw the light," he said breathlessly. "We thought it was his wrath made manifest. The storm came and then the sky broke. We followed to see what he had sent us." Kyle dragged himself upright against a piece of fallen masonry, watching the pilgrim's trembling hands clutch the Aquila pendant around his neck. "There is nothing left here," Kyle said. "Not true," the man insisted. "There are survivors in the mountains. We come to the ruins to hear his silence." Kyle frowned. "You pray to silence?" The man smiled faintly. "It's all he gives us now. Perhaps it is his way of speaking." The words struck something deep in Cole, something he didn't want to name. He had heard silence before too, not the silence of peace, but the absence that came when faith had no voice left. He looked around at the ruins. The Inquisitor was gone. The custodes were gone. There was no sign of Lyra, only the dead remained. "Have you seen a child?" he asked suddenly. "Small, dark hair. She would have come this way." The pilgrim shook his head. "No child has passed here." Coyle's jaw tightened. He felt the weight of the empty air pressing on him, the faint echo of memory turning into dread. Had she escaped, or had the Inquisition found her first? He couldn't know. He could only hope, and hope was a fragile thing for one like him. The pilgrim was watching him with cautious awe. "If you live, it is a sign," he said. "The Emperor still has purpose for you." Cole laughed, a hoarse, broken sound. "Purpose," he said. "I have killed brothers, defied the throne, and walked away from his will. There is no purpose left for me." The pilgrim didn't flinch. "Then, why are you still breathing?" The question lingered like the smoke around them. Cole had no answer. He reached for his broken bolter, fingers tracing the dented casing, the scratches left by battle. He had lived through countless wars, through the death of worlds, through betrayal and absolution and everything between. Yet this hollow continuation, felt more unbearable than death. The pilgrim stood. "Come with us. There are others. We rebuild what we can." Cole looked at him. "You would take me in, knowing what I am?" "You are what the Emperor made you," the man said simply. "And if he is silent, perhaps he leaves it to us to decide what that means." For a long moment, Cole said nothing. Then he pushed himself to his feet. His armor protested, plates grinding together. He towered over the pilgrim, a giant among ruins, his face shadowed by the faint glow of firelight. "Very well," he said. "Lead me to your silence." They walked for hours through the wreckage of the mountains. The wind grew colder, cutting through Cale's armor like needles. Along the path, other pilgrims joined, ragged shapes in tattered robes, faces hollow but eyes bright with fevered faith. They murmured prayers as they walked, words Cale recognized from his own days in the Reclusium, but their tone was different. Less command, more pleading. When they reached the valley beyond, Cale saw their settlement, a collection of crude shelters built from wreckage and stone, clustered around what had once been a generator shrine. The symbol of the Aquila had been carved above it, but its wings were broken, its edges softened by time. "This is where you rebuild?" he asked. "It is where we remember," the pilgrim said. Cole entered the settlement slowly. The people there recoiled at first, but their fear softened when they saw his limp, his broken armor. To them, he was no longer an angel of death, but a relic, a scarred image of something they had once believed in. He stayed among them that night, sitting near the dying flame of their shrine. The firelight flickered against the ruined Aquila, the shadow of its broken wings stretching across the ground. Around him, the pilgrims whispered their prayers, each voice a quiet thread in a tapestry of devotion woven from desperation. Cale listened. He did not pray. He looked up at the stars, faint pinpricks of light beyond the polluted clouds. Somewhere out there, Terra still burned with eternal radiance. Somewhere, the Emperor still sat upon his golden throne, neither living nor dead, feeding the Astronomicon with the ruin of his flesh. Cale wondered if he could hear them, these broken souls whispering in the dark, or if his silence was not absence, but exhaustion. He thought of Lyra, her small hand clutching his gauntlet, her voice asking questions too simple for Faith to answer. She was alive, he told himself. She had to be. Perhaps that was why he still breathed. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of ozone. Call closed his eyes. Somewhere far above, he thought he heard it again, that faint, impossible whisper threading through the silence. Not command, not judgment, only grief. He looked once more at the broken Aquila, its wings half buried in the ash. For the first time in his long life, he felt no urge to repair it. Let it remain broken. Let it remind them all that even gods can fracture. The Emperor was silent. And in that silence, Cale Varen finally began to listen. For weeks, Cale Varen lived among the pilgrims. It was not peace that kept him there. Peace had long ago become a language he no longer understood, but something quieter, something like gravity. He repaired their broken machines, strengthened the walls of their shelters, and hunted the wild carrion beasts that haunted the ravines at night. They offered him food, water, and prayers. He took only the first two. When they worked, they sang the old hymns. He recognized the words but not their meaning anymore. They had been stripped of the martial rhythm of the battlefield, softened into something closer to lament than worship. Each verse felt like an echo of a dying faith. At night, Cale sat apart from them, listening to the wind. He had stopped wearing his helm. The air here was cold but clean, untouched by industry. He could almost imagine what it had been to breathe as a man again, before the gene seed, before the armor, before the chains of duty. The stars above were sharp and cold, 1,000 distant eyes that neither wept nor judged, but always, beneath the wind, came another sound. A child's voice, faint and fleeting. Sometimes he thought it was the wind itself, sometimes a dream that clung to him even while he was awake. He would hear her calling, Kyle, soft, uncertain, fading as quickly as it came. Each time it happened, the ache in his chest deepened. Then, one evening, the sound became real. He had been walking the ridge above the valley, scanning the horizon for signs of movement. A storm was rising again. Not a natural one, but something vast and deliberate, the kind that carried orbiting ships hidden behind the clouds. Lightning split the sky in straight surgical lines. And there, silhouetted against the flashing light, he saw her. Lyra. She stood at the edge of the cliff, her cloak whipped by the wind, her face pale but alive. For a long moment, Cale didn't move. He thought she might be a vision, the kind the dying see before the end. But when she turned and her eyes met his, all doubt vanished. She smiled, small and sad. He ran to her. The servos in his armor screamed in protest, but he didn't care. When he reached her, he dropped to one knee, his massive frame trembling. "You live," he breathed. "I told you I would," she said. Her voice was stronger than he remembered. He looked her over, thinner, Older somehow, but whole. How? I ran, she said, like you told me. The storm hid me. When the fires stopped, I found others. The pilgrims, Kyle said. She nodded. They said an angel walked with them. I didn't believe them. Kale laughed softly, a broken, hollow sound. I'm no angel. I know, she said. That's why I found you. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight of everything he'd done, everything he'd become, pressed down on him all at once. Lyra stepped closer, placing her small hand against the dented aquila on his chest plate. You're not finished, she said. He shook his head. There's nothing left to finish. The Inquisition believes me dead. The Imperium will forget me soon enough. That is mercy. Her gaze didn't waver. Is forgetting mercy? He wanted to tell her yes, that oblivion was a kind of peace. But as the storm rumbled overhead, he realized he didn't believe it. Forgetting was erasure, and erasure was what the Imperium had done to entire worlds. To deny memory was to let the lie win. He looked at her, at the faint dirt smudge across her cheek, at the defiance in her eyes. Why did you come back? Because you're all that's left of what's true, she said simply. The storm struck then, lightning crashing into the mountain above them, stone splitting and falling in showers of dust. Call pulled her close, shielding her as debris rained around them. Through the roar of thunder came the unmistakable sound of engines, low, heavy, disciplined. Dropships. The Inquisition had returned. Call rose, scanning the horizon. Black silhouettes cut through the clouds, their hulls marked with the sigils of the Ordo Hereticus. He could see the descent trails of multiple ships, each one spearing through the storm like a falling sword. They were not searching. They knew exactly where to land. He turned to Lyra. You have to go. No. You can't fight them. Neither can you. He looked out at the valley, where the pilgrims were already scattering in panic. I can buy them time. Lyra stepped in front of him, eyes fierce. If you die again, it won't matter. They'll just burn everything and call it holy. Call froze. There was no fear in her voice, only a quiet, terrible understanding. She had seen enough to know what faith looked like when it devoured itself. The first dropship landed on the ridge opposite them, its engines kicking up waves of ash. The ramp opened, and figures in black armor emerged, stormtroopers of the Inquisition, their visors glowing red in the dark. Behind them came Liren Thass. She had survived. Her armor was scorched, her cloak torn, but her posture was still perfect, her rosette gleaming like a wound. She looked down across the valley, her eyes locking onto Kyle. You persist, she called, her voice carried by amplifiers. You deny death as you deny faith. There will be no third chance. Cole stepped forward, the wind tearing at his tattered cloak. You already killed faith, Inquisitor. I'm only what's left. You misunderstand, she said. Faith cannot die, only those unworthy of it. Lyra spoke then, her small voice cutting through the storm like a blade. If faith means killing everything that breathes, then it deserves to die. The Inquisitor turned her gaze toward the child. For the first time, her mask of serenity faltered. So, that is the voice you chose to protect, she said. How poetic. The seed of heresy speaks with the arrogance of innocence. Kyle's hand tightened around his broken bolter. You will not touch her. Liren's tone softened, almost gentle. You've already damned her by keeping her alive. The galaxy will never forgive either of you. Kyle raised the weapon, the cracked optics of his helm flaring to life. Then we'll live without forgiveness. The storm ignited. Bolter fire roared across the ridge, tracer rounds streaking like falling stars. Cole moved through it like a creature born of thunder, his broken armor shedding fragments with every motion. Each shot he fired was a memory of the brothers he'd lost, the vows he'd broken, the innocence he'd tried to save. The Inquisitors' forces closed in from both sides, disciplined, relentless. Lyra darted through the chaos, throwing rocks, dragging the wounded, refusing to hide. Kale saw her once through the smoke, her hair whipping in the wind, her face set with impossible determination. She looked like something he hadn't seen in centuries. Hope. When the Inquisitor finally faced him again, the ridge was burning. The air was thick with fire and blood. Coil stood amid the wreckage, every breath a struggle, his armor split open like a shell. Liren's blade was drawn, a power sword humming with blue fire. "Lay down your weapon," she said. "You've proven your conviction. End it with dignity." Kyle looked at her, his voice quiet but unyielding. "No." Her expression hardened. "Then die as you lived, defiant and damned." He met her charge head-on. The clash was a storm within a storm. Blade against fist, faith against defiance, doctrine against will. Sparks and blood mingled on the wind. Each strike drove him backward, but he refused to fall. He caught her sword arm, forcing it aside, and for an instant their faces were inches apart. "Tell me," he said, his voice raw. "When he finally speaks again, what will he say of you?" Her answer was a whisper. "That I was right." Kale drove his fist through her chest. The light died in her eyes, replaced by something almost like surprise. She fell without sound, her blade clattering to the stone. The storm broke above them, lightning bathing the ridge in white light. When the echoes faded, Kale dropped to his knees beside her. The rain began to fall again, washing the blood from his hands. Lyra ran to him, kneeling beside his broken frame. "Kyle," she whispered, "it's over." He looked at her, this child who had survived everything faith had destroyed, and smiled for the first time in what felt like centuries. "No," he said softly, "it's beginning." The light from the burning ships reflected in her eyes. "What will we do?" "Remember," he said, "and make the remembering cost them something." He leaned back, closing his eyes as the storm faded into the distance. His heart slowed, his breath came thin. The last thing he felt was her hand against his, small and steady. When the dawn came, the mountain was quiet. The Inquisitors' forces were gone, their ships burning across the horizon. The pilgrims emerged from the valley, drawn by the silence. They found Lyra kneeling beside the giant's body, the broken Aquila still clutched in her hand. "Who was he?" one asked. Lyra looked up at the rising sun. A man who remembered what angels forget. The wind carried her words through the ruins, through the shattered halls of the cathedral, through the endless silence of the Emperor's dominion, and somewhere, far beyond the reach of the Astronomican's light, a star flickered, faint, defiant, alive. Kale Varan was gone, but the memory of his heresy had already begun to spread.